Hello everyone. Today, I'm going to review what many people consider the best tablet for playing Fortnite Mobile, the Apple iPad Pro M5. I recently purchased it, so I'd like to share my impressions. Some people say it suffers from frequent FPS drops, so I'll also talk about ways to address that. If you're thinking about competing in Fortnite on mobile, you might be unsure which tablet to choose, so I hope this video helps you decide. Let's get started. First, let's take a look at the basic specifications. This information comes from GSM Arena. For reference, I'm showing a comparison with the Apple iPad Pro M4. Aside from the chipset changing from M4 to M5, and a small difference in memory capacity, the devices are almost identical. In terms of the key points I usually look at when choosing a smartphone or tablet, this device basically checks all the boxes. However, while more Android smartphones and tablets are starting to support 165Hz refresh rates, Apple devices are still capped at 120Hz for now. Currently, Fortnite Mobile officially supports up to 120 FPS. There are some unofficial methods that can push it to 165 FPS, but this isn't officially supported. Looking ahead, if Epic Games eventually adds official 165 FPS support for Fortnite Mobile, I personally think it will be important for Apple devices to support 165Hz displays as well. It will be interesting to see how Apple's future products evolve. Next, let's talk about the touch sampling rate. Apple does not publicly disclose the touch sampling rate, and it's also difficult to measure accurately using apps. So realistically, the only way to judge it is by actually playing and seeing how it feels. Another point is bypass charging. As of now, it appears that Apple still does not support bypass charging. Since bypass charging doesn't directly affect gameplay performance, it may not be a high priority for most players. Now let's move on to benchmark performance. Based on my own testing, the results looked like this. In an 2-2 benchmark, it scored around 3.89 million points. Some reports online suggest it can exceed 4 million points in certain cases. In 3D Mark, the peak score exceeded 9,000, and then stabilized in the 7,000 range. These results clearly show how strong the GPU performance is. However, based on my personal experience, when it comes to Fortnite Mobile, I believe CPU performance has a bigger impact on gameplay than GPU performance. Next, let's look at the price. As of March 7th, the 11-inch model starts at around $879, while the 13-inch model starts at around $1,183. Compared to Android tablets, this is quite expensive, so the barrier to purchasing it is fairly high. Now let me talk about my actual gameplay experience. The model I bought is the 13-inch iPad Pro M5. The reason is that my current main Android tablet is the Honor Magic Pad 3 Pro, which also has a 13-inch display. When comparing performance, I wanted to avoid differences in heat dissipation due to size, and I also didn't want the control feel to affect the comparison. Now for the results. Right after I bought it, when it was running iOS 26 version 26.0.1, the game could reach 120 FPS, but in modes like box fights or creative, especially when many players were nearby, I noticed frequent FPS drops. This was around mid-February, so it could have also been influenced by a Fortnite update. However, after updating to iOS 26.3.1, the FPS became much more stable. So if you bought an iPad Pro M5 and your FPS isn't stable, I recommend updating to the latest iOS version. As for touch responsiveness, before the update it felt a bit inconsistent. After updating, it seemed to improve quite a bit. Compared to the iPad Pro M4, I didn't notice a major difference in real gameplay. Another thing I noticed is that sometimes during close combat, the game briefly fails to register inputs. And I think this also happened on the M4. It doesn't happen very often, so it might just be a timing issue. Improving touch responsiveness is actually a challenge shared by both Android and iPad devices. Compared to using a keyboard or controller on PC, touchscreen input has inherent processing overhead. Because of that, further improvements in this area may be quite difficult. Now let's briefly talk about battery performance. This isn't directly related to gameplay, but it's useful information. On many Android tablets, even when playing while charging with bypass charging enabled, the battery may still slowly drain. However, with the M5, when playing while charging, the battery doesn't drain, which could be a big advantage for players who play for long continuous sessions. Also, the mistouch prevention system seems to have fewer false detections compared to Android tablets, which makes gameplay feel more stable. Overall, if we ignore the price, it's an excellent tablet. If budget isn't an issue, it's definitely worth considering. That's all for today's video. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video.